I welcome you to our book launch. I'm very happy that you all came. We have also a live stream tonight. I hope it's working, so I'm happy to see you all here, although we have a live stream on Facebook. I'm very happy that you made it also to our new campus, so this is our book. We will talk later about it a bit. We're gonna have, we do this evening basically in 3 sessions. We're gonna have a welcome session, we're gonna have a discussion content-wise on the book, and then afterwards we are hosting a round table. Afterwards, in a 4th session, we offer, or we would be happy to cheer with all of you the book with a glass of wine. So I hope you feel comfortable and going to enjoy the next 2 hours with us. So first I call on the stage our ambassador. Thank you much for coming here, Dr. Wasum Reiner, and you can open the event.
Good evening. Thank you very much. Professor Eli Salzberger, Professor Fania Ost-Salzberger, dear member of the Beirat of the German Academic Exchange Service, dear members of the different political foundations in Israel and in the Palestinian territories, dear students, dear researchers, ladies and gentlemen, it is an enormous pleasure and a great honor for me to be here on the occasion of the book on the German political foundation's work between Jerusalem, Ramallah, and Tel Aviv. Political foundations are a very important element in the German-Israeli and the German-Palestinian relationship ever since. This is why I particularly welcome your thorough analysis of the work of those foundations, covering all aspects of their engagement. Germany and its political foundations, this is a topic which brings about much interest, curiosity, in many countries around the world. In some countries, their work has been rejected, feared, even forbidden, and in others, it is particularly welcomed or even requested. The German political foundations are special entities linked very closely to the history of Germany. The political foundations have been established, or in the case of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, re-established, after the experiences during the year of the failed Weimar Republic and the years of National Socialism during the Third Reich, with Germany's responsibility for the beginning of World War II and the unspeakable atrocities of the Shoah. Political foundations are an important part of the civil society. They are independent from government and consequently may have positions quite different from those of governments. They are not neutral and they do not have an obligation to be neutral. The contrary is the case. They are acting out of their own responsibility. They are active within Germany and they are active as NGOs around the world. I consider them, me as ambassador here and for ever being in the German Foreign Office, as a unique asset of Germany's foreign policy. The mission of Political Foundation was and still is to communicate to the people the values of democracy, the value of rule of law, of human rights, the value of political debate, to stimulate controversial discussions, and thereby to strengthen political culture. The aim is really to strengthen parliamentary democracy by contributing to the creation of critical voters willing to seek, willing to understand facts and reality, willing to seek political compromises in full respect of contrary positions and beliefs, and with a commitment to protecting minorities within the society. In short, in the German system, they are, as well as the political parties, absolute key elements of the democratic society. Their specific tasks lie in public interest and therefore justify their public funding. In Germany, the work of the political foundations is as important today as it was in the early days of the Republic. They might have become even more important today, where conditions for parliamentary democracy have become particularly challenging. We have to live with politicians and voters who are acting in a sort of post-truth, alternative facts environment where there is little or no differentiation anymore between real objective facts on the one side and emotions among friends in social networks on the other, where we cannot build anymore on an impact of leading printed media. Democracies need professional and precise analysis of quite often very complex facts. Democracies need to confront themselves with different opinions. They need to discuss about different solutions. They need to withstand internal controversies. This process is exactly what populism fears. It shies away from confrontation and offers simple narratives. And this is exactly why this book about political foundations and their work in Israel and in the Palestinian territories comes at a great time. In this region, we have the privilege of having offices of all the German political foundations. Maybe there even is an overload of political foundations work, as suggested in one article of your study. They are offering different prisms throughout their activities, together with their different partners from Israel and the Palestinian territories. They contribute also to intensifying the German relations towards the region even more, and they contribute to the lively democracy in this country. I would therefore like to thank the organizers and the hosts of this conference for their important work. I would equally like to thank the authors of this book and everybody who contributed, and wish them the best luck in their different academic careers. And I would like to thank from the bottom of my heart the German political foundations for their work they're carrying out in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Ramallah, and everywhere else. If they would not already exist, we would have to invent them. So I wish this conference good luck. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Ambassador. I call the second opening speech to the stage Dr. Stefan Bienefeld from the DAAD, who is like fostering our center and here for a visit.
Thank you very much. I don't have a doctor, I don't have a PhD degree. Everybody always gives me one, so feel free to give me more, but I never did one academically in the university. In any case, thank you very much, Katharina, and to the Center for this invitation. Dear Eli, dear Fanya, dear Ambassador, dear representatives of the different political foundations, dear guests. It is a great privilege and honor for me to be here today on behalf of the DAAD and to convey you the greetings of our Secretary General, Dr. Dorothea Rüland, and also our President, Professor Margret Wintermantel. It is great to see when such a publication on a controversial, or maybe controversial, but definitely politically relevant issue comes out of one of the centers that we fund. We are very proud to be supporting the Haifa Center for German European Studies since 13 years. So this is a long-standing project, a long-standing cooperation between DAAD and the University of Haifa. And it's always great to see when young future researchers in the early stages of their academic careers come up with a very relevant issue and relevant publication. I don't think this is my place really to judge or to pass any opinion on the work of the political foundations. I do think that they are, as the ambassador already said, a unique German phenomenon. They are very different from structures that you see in other countries. There's no comparable structure really in most other neighboring countries of Germany, nor in the US or North America. And there are certainly different opinions on the work that they do in different parts of the world. I remember being together with Katharina in a conference in South Korea last year, where we also had a discussion about the role of political foundations. There's a lot of them also represented in Seoul. And our South Korean partners then told us that for them, they are one of the most important sources of information of what's happening in the north of the country, because they are one of the very few actors. They don't have offices in North Korea, but they go there via Beijing usually, or via China, because there's no direct way to go from A to B, so you always have to have the Chinese bypass. And they bring back information which they also share with the South Korean society. And the South Korean partners have told us, the German political foundations, they are the only ones who don't really have a stake here in this situation. All the other people we get information from, our media, North Korean media, Chinese, Russians, Americans, they were all parties in the war. And the Germans have they were no party in our war, and they don't have a stake in this. Also, they have this history of being separated and being then unified again. So from our perspective, this is a very important source of information. So they value that work very highly. I also think that the same goes true for the people in the northern part of the country. So that's a very different and much less controversial, I think, position than political foundations might have in other parts of the world. We are, as DAAD, cooperating with the political foundations every now and then on different occasions in different countries. I do remember that we did a project together with the law school in Hanoi in Vietnam, with the Ebert Foundation, with the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. We worked together on a project on journalism in Cambodia. So there's different occasions where things actually meet, although as DAAD we are a non-political organization, we are an association of the German universities. Nevertheless, we do see the work of the political foundation in most of the countries that we work in as well. We value them as partners, and we wish them all the best for their work. And again, scientific analysis of what they do, especially in this part of the world, I think is highly relevant for the debate both in Germany about German foreign policy, but also about what's happening here in the Palestinian territories and in the larger region that we're in here. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to wish you all the best for this conference tonight, and the best for your future careers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. So the book launch is then officially opened now. And we're going to start with our kind of first panel, where our idea was to give you a kind of an idea about the book, and maybe I ask Professor Salzberger to join us to make it more equally gender balanced, the panel. Okay. So my colleague Anna Abelmann and me, we decided that I will start, although I'm the political scientist and she's the historian on this panel, so we do it the other way around. And it's my pleasure or my honor to thank everybody who helped us with this little book. I can tell you by now, and I never thought about this before, that editing a book is a really long trip, and you would rather prefer not to take it alone. So I'm very happy. First of all, I would like to say a big Dankeschön and thank you so much for everybody who contributed. The story of this book starts with our matchmaker. Our matchmaker was Professor Amos Morris Reich, who got us both in touch, and from there we took it on. We started with a workshop 3 years ago at the University of Haifa on the NGO law, that was in this time very a current and hot topic. From there, we did another conference a year later at the Ruhr University in Bochum, sponsored by both of our centers. We had the possibility to invite speakers from the Palestinian territories, from Israel, from Germany, and we all met back in Bochum. And then we ended up with having a lot of different perspectives, and this is why the subtitle of the book is A Kaleidoscope. We had the possibility to invite members of the foundations or directors like Mark Frings, who will also speak later on, was part of this conference and also wrote for the book. But we also managed to invite partners who contributed also. I have Omar Hakim sitting here, who wrote a piece from partners' perspective, more or less, on the Böll Foundation. So we have basically 13 contributors. Without them, we wouldn't have made it. A special thanks also goes to our both PhD supervisors. My doctoral mother, Professor Fania Salzberger, is here tonight. My doctoral father, Professor Stefan Stetter, is watching from Munich, I hope. And of course our friends and families who supported us. I think it took us over a year to get the book together and to get all the papers that we needed in the right format. We started the conference with a topic called the German Political Foundations Payer or a Player. And as my part is the political part in this evening, I want to a bit elaborate on this topic. I did my master's degree on a totally different topic, and then I started to work for the Friedrich Ebert Foundation in East Jerusalem and afterwards in Warsaw. And I all the time during this work asked myself the question, like, what are these foundations? Like, what kind of impact do they have on German foreign policy? What do they do abroad? Why do we have, like, combining all foundations together, almost 500 offices all around the world? And what do they do with German tax money? So I try to take it from a political scientist approach. It's called, I will give you a short introduction, it's called a foreign policy analysis, and until recently we really focused in this category on checking what the government is doing, like what governments do on a foreign policy level, and we never really took a deep look into like what do like this kind of foundations like NGOs or like actors of civil society do around this work, and how influential are they. So I took for this especially like Habermas, who really elaborated on this, that he said we are living in an age that is a post-national state age, so we have to take it into consideration, especially in foreign policy, also other actors, naming, like in our case, the German political foundations. In contrast, I would say, to the embassies, they are not that strictly bounded to political guidelines. And I, like at least in my research, came along that they provide a much more grassroots-oriented sources. Like they have offices. We have here a representative from the Burl Foundation in Israel, in Tel Aviv. We have an office, but you have also a pendant like in the territories. So you have offices on the ground. You have money that you can operate on, and you're not that strictly bounded to a political outline. We have also the head of the Ebert Foundation Israel here, so you can see already that we have a whole conglomerate of people who can talk much freer than from a diplomatic source or level. What they do, like at least that is what I figured out in my work, is that also they mainly provide political decision workers, political decision makers with knowledge. And I think that knowledge in our world, and especially in foreign policy, is a very great asset, because this allows you to legitimize your actions and your decision making, and this needs to be taken under consideration. So in this way, like especially the German political foundations, I would say function in a modern state as kind of agents that provide this knowledge. And if you take like the guidelines and you ask, okay, but what are you really doing? What would you say? I would like to quote from it. Was the flyer from the Ebert Foundation, from the main office, that was released in 2016. So if you ask the Ebert Foundation, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's good to have experts in the room, what are you doing abroad? What do you think is your mission? The flyer says, we would like to promote a free society based on the values of solidarity, which offers all its citizens the same opportunities to participate on political, economical, social, and cultural levels, regardless of their origin, sex, or religion. And this is something what the ambassador also pointed out before. I think it's a very important task, and it's a global task in our age, especially with the rise of populism. So this is also something that we outlined in the book, because we focused on the work of the political foundations here in this region, and Anna will elaborate a little bit later on, a bit more deeper on it. But we basically defined like 3 stages like of work. Like the work here started with the in 45 after the founding of the German Republic, until 87 with like just simply building trust. Okay, we're coming from a very like deeply historically shattered Nazi terror time, and the main role in this area of the foundations, especially here in this region, was simply build trust. Okay, we cannot operate, we cannot do real foreign policy, and the foundations were the first one taking over to re-establish a trust. Then we have a second phase, like going in the 90s until 2000, where I would call it a bridging and mediating phase, where like the foundations try to accompany the whole process of Oslo, And they started also to open offices in East Jerusalem and in Ramallah. And the third stage that we're in right now, I would call it a much more global stage, that where we are trying to, where the foundation is trying to provide ideas for global problems. Like that means how to maintain a welfare state, for example, how to deal with ecological problems, how to be committed still to democratic values, how to encourage equal rights, equal payments for women and men, for example, or how to defend basically global human values. Okay, so if we're coming back to this debate, trying to take a look into it, what are these foundations? Are they like just payers? Do they just deliver money? Or are they really players? I would say one have to look very much into the field where they are playing in. Of course, they foster projects, and of course, they give money. But, and it's also something maybe that is interesting, and you can get it from the inside of the book, each project the foundations founded are just like they found projects not entirely fully, but up to 50%. So it means it's not a full just payer, and this makes them already automatically a player, saying like that they also want to have a word in whatever project is being run. Okay, and to see what can they give or what can they contribute, also like in a deep and content-wise sense. So if we go back to the foreign policy analysis, I would like to describe the German political foundations a little bit less as just think tanks, but also as do tanks. And I, in my research, did interviews with the heads of the foundation, or like people who work for the foundation, with partners of the foundation, and with German politicians. So a three group of people I interviewed. And interestingly, mainly the people who work for the foundation would be very understatement. They would tell me, we don't have so much influence, you're overestimating us, whereas if you talk to the partners or to the politicians, meaning like German politicians, Israeli politicians, Palestinian politicians, they would rather overemphasize the role of the foundation, say, no, they're important for us. We consult them, they consult us, so it's really like, they are a player, like they will really take their papers and they will take them under consideration. So I found a very big gap between self-reflection and what is maybe really on the ground. Okay, maybe this is also, I would like to close it and to give it a bit more time to look into a legal aspect of the foundations and to go back to the historical part. What I think and what I also figured out, and I would go along with the ambassador on this, is that especially in a time where we're living right now of populism and fake news, the foundations are very important to cater also political debates and to promote democracy. And this doesn't count just for this region, but this counts kind of globally, and they are like embedded in a big network, so this is also why they can cater or foster these bigger debates. I would also say, because this is often a criticism that you would receive here, that they shouldn't really be seen as like colonizers or lecturers. I think this is not the task, but it's more a task to stand in for democracy and human rights. And again, I think this is, especially with the historical connection of Germany, a very important role that they are taking over at the moment. So thank you for this, and I will hand over to Professor Salzberger.
Really, congratulations with the publication of this book. It's really very nice as a father to see that the center is producing new babies, and this is a very, very nice baby. But I want to be a little bit more critical here. And you know, we are celebrating the activities of the German political foundations in Germany, in the Middle East, and globally. And I think that there are some problems here, and I want to highlight them. I don't know if we have anybody from the critical sides of the political map here. We were, by the way, we got several emails from people, critical people who wanted to come, and I said, of course, come and ask. But I want to play the devil's advocate a little bit in a little bit broader perspective. You know, German political foundations associated with political parties is not a unique phenomenon, not unique German phenomenon. But German political foundations are unique for several aspects, and I think the interesting aspect from our perspective is that they operate outside Germany. You don't find other political foundations associated with political parties operating usually outside the boundaries of their state. And the debate in Israel emerged about 3 or 3.5 years ago with the initiative of this current government, the transparency law, the NGO law, that in perspective of 3 years was very minimalistic problem vis-a-vis liberalism or liberal democracy. If we look today on the other initiatives of the government, we fought it very much, the NGO law, but today we have a lot of other things to fight. But there is some, I think, interesting elements or arguments of those who proposed the law with regard to foreign money playing in the local political map or the local political game. And it's very nice to talk about values of democracy and values of human rights. I'm also in favor of them, of course. But societies, if society operates from procedural and from substantive aspects, a broad, wide, and rich democratic process in which there is deliberation, in which there is conversation, in which different parties try to convince others on their position. The problem of democratic theory and the intervention of foreign forces, even enlightened or liberal foreign powers, is, I think, something that we have to talk very frankly about. I know that the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung is very, very proud that they brought to a revolution in Portugal in the 70s, a revolution of democracy. But in a sense, if political foundations, you will have in the future a political foundation associated with the AfD in a few years' time, and if they come here and open an office and try to convince the Israeli public to vote against the Palestinian state, against equality of rights, how will you distinguish that this is legitimate and this is not legitimate? So I think that there is an interesting point, philosophical, political philosophy point that has to be addressed, and we tried in the book a little bit to touch upon it, but I think that the debate is still open, and it's not an easy debate. When you look at the responses of the Israeli legislator, which actually followed responses of many legislators, actually the first person to talk against political foundations or NGOs supported by foreign entities was George W. Bush after the 9/11 attacks. He accused political foundations and NGOs in cultivating hatred within the US. Following that, the person who jumped on this wagon was Putin, arguing that political foundations, NGO, brought about various revolutions in the former Soviet Union, in Georgia, and in other places. And if you look around the world following this, there was a very golden age of NGOs, which actually only started in the 80s. And already in the 90s, you have a backlash in about 70 countries in the world that enacted various laws against foreign support of foreign aid to NGOs. In this perspective, although we fought the Israeli law is very minimalistic. The Israeli law, the NGO law, actually obliges NGOs in Israel that get more than 50% of their funding from a foreign entity, it's foreign state basically. This is one of the problems of the law. They only have to report it clearly, have to report it in all their documents. It's a shaming law basically. But if you look on other 70 countries by now, who enacted, by the way, including the US, who enacted various laws regulating NGO or civil society organization, you find that the Israeli legislation is the most minimalistic because you have many countries in which NGOs are banned, support for NGOs from abroad is banned, prohibited, and various other responses. The interesting, I think, question vis-a-vis the NGOs in Israel and the political foundation. I would say one thing before that. I think one of the problems or the real criticism of the Israeli law is that it distinguishes between foreign support from states or governments to NGOs in Israel and foreign support by individuals. The law was targeted, and this is not, this is quite clear, the law was targeted against liberal left-wing organizations in Israel. As I said, it applies to organizations that are supported more than 50% of their funding by foreign government, and this is about 27 organizations, 25 of which are center and left center. The law, I think, would have been possibly justified philosophically had it applied to all foreign support for organization in Israel. What the law actually doesn't do is that it requires organizations basically from the right wing that are supported significantly by foreign donors, evangelists in the US or extreme right-wing organizations abroad. And had the law little bit different definition included these support, I think that the law could have been justified on democratic theory. The problem of the law that it doesn't really, that it makes the distinction between support of foreign governments and support of individuals. But even, support of foreign governments, we are talking about recently about possible intervention of a third country in Israeli elections. Okay, we all know which third country we're talking about. Okay, and in a sense, when you think about it, it can be also intervention of the German political foundations in favor of liberal democratic parties or left-wing parties in Israel. So I'm saying the debate should take place. It's not one-sided debate, and there are various arguments for different positions. A word about NGOs and the German political foundation, because this is quite interesting. German political foundations, many of them are registered in Israel as basically non-profit organizations, which means that the NGO law applies for them, on them. And of course, since they are funded 100%, the foundations themselves are funded 100% by the political parties abroad, they are included in the law. They have to, the law applies on them. They have to basically report on the fact that they are funded by foreign entities. But there is a derivative effect of the law or the Israeli new situation on these foundations, on the German political foundations. Foundations that contribute to Israeli NGOs, this can be also considered as contribution of a foreign entity to Israeli NGOs. So the law actually applies on them as kind of a double effect. I don't think any of the foundations, you will correct me later, were approached by any of the legal institutions saying, you have to report in your paper, letterhead and so forth, that you are funded by a foreign entity. The Israeli government is not really after the German political foundations operating here, including the Bell Foundation. But that's a possibility that at one stage you will be asked, aren't you covered by the law? And of course, the money that comes from these foundations to different Israeli NGOs is covered by the law. Now, we can, I don't want to steal the stage, so I will end with one possible observation that might be interesting to debate afterwards, resorting to the normative analysis of whether foreign entities, either private or public, are legitimized in supporting financially or intervening in a different country's internal affairs, as can be seen, that one should be to distinguish. And I don't know if the foundations have a ethical code of operation. But for example, there is a difference between micro level and macro level, between an attempt of various NGOs, including the German foundations, or by derivation those who are supported by these foundations, to enforce equally the law in Israel, to support those who cannot, for example, go to the court and maintain their rights. If we are talking about the Bedouins, Al-Ahmar case and others. It's totally different context when there is a debate about legislation or about policy, and then German political foundation takes a side in this debate. So it's a very different story when you talk about impacting policies, legislation, or other policies reflected in other governmental collective decision-making. And I think, the borders between these two cases are not so clear. It's also a question that has to be debated. I would say, again, that materializing the law in the Israeli context or in other contexts is a legitimate, totally legitimate from a democratic theory also of a foreign organization operating within a country. But trying to impact the democratic process, if it is democratic process, and maybe here we have to distinguish between non-democratic countries in which foreign intervention may be justified because there is a failure of the democratic process, or there is no democratic process, and countries in which there is basically a democratic process. And I think that with all the criticism that we have against the current government, we still have remnants, not remnants, we still have substantive democratic process in Israel. And here, if you are a foreign government and you have an issue wanting to bring your input into the public debate as a foreign government, that's fine. But if you are a local NGO behind the scenes, supported by all kinds of entities, there is some problematic issues. So, we all very much respect the German political foundations and, of course, their substance of operation. But as, somebody touches on political philosophy, it's always important to do the Rawlsian exercise, okay? Would you have the same opinion had we were talking about the Russian political foundations and their operation in Israel, or the Chinese political foundation, not foundations, operating in Israel? And I think that this is a good framework to continue discussion, and I will stop at this stage, and hopefully that we can discuss this later on. Thanks.
Okay. Even though Katharina already said thank you to all our contributors, I also would shortly thank all of you who made this book possible, and also thank the organizers for this event. Last but not least, I now would like to focus on the historical perspective of the German Political Foundation's work in Jerusalem, Ramallah, and Tel Aviv, or to say it from the historical point of view, in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Ramallah, actually, which is part of the book, and it's also the key of my own research. First of all, what makes this case study of the work of Political Foundation especially interesting, and what makes it also difficult to compare it to the Foundation's work in other countries, is the combination of two very unique factors, which already partly were mentioned by the speeches before, and that first of all is the very unique concept of the political foundations themselves, which Katharina already described, and also which were mentioned during the opening speeches. And the second one, of course, is the very unique character of the German-Israeli relations. And this in combination gives a very interesting environment, which I now very briefly try to summarize. To give you a broad overview over the historical development of foundations, I would define three different phases from the very beginning until today. The first one starts in the late 1950s, when the first contacts were done, and ends in the late 1970s, before the foundations opened the first offices, the first official representations in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. But even before this opening of the first offices, there was already a 20-year-long history of bilateral cooperation, which was mainly done by the Ebert Foundation, which initiated the first contacts already in the late 1950s, and sent a first delegate to Israel as early as in August 1960, followed by a first delegation in 1961. And that was even a couple of years before the German embassy opened in Israel. Nevertheless, the foundation's activities before the formal institutionalization mostly happened very discreet, very much in the background, and not very much with having the public involved. And even it, in some parts, also happened without really being integrated into the official agenda of the foundations. So even so, the foundation started quite early. The Ebert Foundation did not mention any Israeli partners before in their annual reports before 1973, and also then they only mentioned or described the delegation of Israeli trade unionists visiting Germany. Is it raining? The second phase includes the time of the 1980s and 1990s, when the foundation institutionalized in Israel by opening own offices and established their own networks with a growing range of different partner institutions. By the end of the 1990s, all existing German political foundations had opened their own representations in Israel, and even more, also in East Jerusalem and Ramallah. Closer? Okay. 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 What also changed in the second phase was that the foundations became much more public. While until the 80s they very much worked without having like public relations, without having like an office sign outside of the building. In the 90s they became much more open towards this approach. And the third period is the one from the early 2000s until today, which kind of marks the third phase in which the foundations entered the stage not only as well-established players, but also really could profit from or benefit from their established network. Like, for example, they were involved in organizing larger Israeli conferences, as the Herzliya conference, and even during the Second Intifada, they tried to take a role as a mediator in certain ways. Additionally, as it also was mentioned already, they discovered a range of new fields of activities, as, for example, the environmental protection, women's rights, gender equality, and many others. Now, especially in the first phase of the political foundations, three factors are quite outstanding, or three aspects are quite outstanding. The first one is that this cooperation was never a one-way street. Even in the very beginning, the collaboration of the foundations with Israeli partners was supported by decision makers on both sides. This, I think, was one of the keys to the success of the foundation's work from the very beginning. Another thing is that the foundations, and there are also examples from other countries, always raised the activities in time of crisis. For example, when the bilateral relations became difficult, closer? That were basically the moments when the foundations intensified their own activities. Like, for example, the Ebert Foundation did not open the first office in Israel during the so-called golden era between 1969 and 1977, when both countries actually were ruled by social democratic governments, but after the Israel elections in 1977, when the official bilateral relations significantly cooled down. Also, especially during the first phase, until, let's say, the end of the 1960s, the foundation often were kind of a step ahead of the official political relations and also the official political representatives. For example, when the Ebert Foundation sent a second delegation to Israel in 1966, which included a number of high-ranking trade unionists, no one remembered to inform the newly opened German embassy about this delegation, simply because no one thought that this would be relevant or even matter. And this caused, and there are quite some documents which show the discussion between the Mapai, the Ebert Foundation, and the German embassy. This caused quite a discussion. Who now should contact the German ambassador and solve this mess? Okay, so this is a very brief historical summary of the German political of the history of the German political foundation. I think there are quite many more questions which we try to raise in the book, and I think what the book also shows, there are quite a lot of questions which were not even raised yet. So I think the entire field of political foundations is a very interesting field of research, which I think is going to become much more important in the future. Also, as I defined three phases, I also would like to look a little bit ahead. And I think the future will show if we are now about to enter like a fourth stage, which of course depends first of all on the political developments in all related states, and also on the question if we are at some point going to see a seventh German political foundations opening in this region. So far for now, and thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you, Anna, thank you, Eli, and we are almost back in time, so it's time for the third part of the day, the round table. I would like to call to stage Steffen Hagemann, Mark Frings, Robin Nathanson, Talia Sasson, and Fania Ost-Salzberger.
Shalom, dear friends. My name is Fania Ost-Salzberger. I will be the moderator of this panel. We have 4 fascinating panelists here with us, and a topic which is, as we have already heard and seen, deeply relevant to the current situation in all countries involved, and deeply ambivalent in its impact and impasses. And I will be quite brief in my opening, but I would like, as a historian of political science, to say something to the heart of the concepts involved, Then I will say something personal, and then of course we shall have each of our panelists hopefully speaking for about 5 minutes. I will not be tough, but I will be watching. And then a roundtable discussion. My conceptual point is as follows. There are two very complicated triangles involved in our subject matter today. Deeply ingrained in the beautiful and important book co-edited by Dr. Anna Abelmann and by my Dr. Tochter, Katharina Konarek. I am very proud of you both and thank you for this important contribution. The two complicated triangles are the following. First, on the philosophical level, Begriffsgeschichte. We have the state, we have politics, or if you like, the political, and we have civil society. And it is not only our generation which is confused by the complexity of the interaction, the partial overlapping between the state, any state, politics, and civil society. This has a long history, and we are part of the long history. This is not resolved. John Locke, the great English philosopher, thought that civil society was the state itself insofar as it is run in a good way. Societas civilis is the state. The great German philosopher, Friedrich Wilhelm Hegel, was among the first to substantially dissect, draw a line, distinguished between the state and civil society. In this sense, we live by Hegel and not by Locke. We think that the state and civil society somehow belong to different, even confrontational spheres of existence. Where is politics in all that? It is confusing. And part of the present emotionality about the interface of governments like the German government or the Israeli government, the political playing fields in each of the countries, Germany, Israel, the Palestinian Authority, other countries impacted by the German cultural foreign policy, and civil society, is genuinely confusing because it is. Because sometimes we do not know, and we've heard this in the previous session, where one ends and the other begin. One humble contribution I can suggest here is that politics, in the ancient and broad sense, in Aristotle's sense, permeates every field of existence. Politics is not just the government in Jerusalem or Berlin. Politics is enmeshed in civil society, in human relations, even in the family. Anyone dreaming of depoliticizing our life is dreaming for naught. This cannot happen, especially not today. The second triangle of complexity is, of course, and I have been writing about this in my preface to the collection of essays, the German, Israeli, Palestinian. I wish it were some kind of a triangle of conversation. It is not so as yet. For many, many years, for obvious and justifiable reasons, Germany and Israel conducted a painful conversation between them that excluded the Palestinians. For many, many years, Israelis like myself tried to have a conversation with the Palestinians that is 1/10, 100th as successful as the one we have had with Germany in the last 40 years. This has not yet happened, let alone the attempt at some kind of a triangular, deep discussion about the past and the future. Once again, Complexity is a fact. Confusion is understandable. One of the virtues of the book we are celebrating here is to try to open up at least the questions, if not the answers, about these two sets of complexities. And before I pass on to my fellow panelists, the microphone, I will say something personal with your permission. 2 weeks ago, I have lost my dear father, Amos Oz, who has been engaged for time immemorial almost, since I was a very little girl, with the Israeli-Arab conflict. For many years, the name Germany was not even mentioned in our house as I was growing up, except for the phrase borrowed from his own great uncle, "Our foot will never be set on German land." This began to change in the 1980s, by the way, in parallel to the arrival, not because of, but in parallel to the arrival of many of the German political foundations here, and also what I have been writing about at length, the almost miraculous coming together of Israeli and German civil societies, and especially artists and academics, in a wonderfully benign and productive and creative dialogue. My father went to Germany, and he found in Germany not only readers and audiences, which surprised him enormously and pleasantly, but also friends of the heart. I think that in his last decades he wished he could have conducted with Palestinians the same level and depth and quality of conversation that he has been conducting with Germany for the last 3 decades. It's not the same. This is not a parallel, how do you call it, an equal triangle at all. But the fact is that whereas my father dedicated his life to peace with the Palestinians, the best fruit of his ability to converse took place between Germany and Israel and not between Germany and Palestine. I wish it had been otherwise. But I know that as we keep working and trying, he will be smiling at us up from the heaven in which I do not believe. So this is both my philosophical and my personal comments, and this is time to pass the torch, not before I very briefly present all our speakers, only in 1 sentence each, if you forgive me, because everyone can have access to their bios. We have Dr. Robbie Nathanson, General Director of the Macro Center for Political Economics. On my other side, my far left, doesn't mean anything, is Dr. Stefan Hagemann of the Heinrich Böll Foundation, Head of Office since last month. Am I right? Congratulations, Stefan, and willkommen. Mark Frings, which has been with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung for quite a while now, and most recently with the Middle East Department of the Foundation, serving as resident representative of the KAS to the Palestinian territories, one of the most interesting places one can find oneself in. And finally, but you will be the first speaker, that's why I left you for the last, Talia, is Attorney Talia Sasson, Chair of the International Council of the New Israel Fund, until recently President of the New Israel Fund, author of the famous Sasson report delivered to Ariel Sharon's government about the West Bank settlements, and author of the book, On the Edge of the Abyss is the Victory of the Settlements, the End of Israeli Democracy. 2015, question still open. Each of you have about 5 minutes before we open the round table for discussion. And Talia, Would you like to be the first?
So thank you so much, Fania, and I adore your father, who was a friend of ours. And thank you, Ambassador to Germany, and thank you for inviting me here. I would like to say only a few comments about this subject that is lying on the table. The Israeli public have gone through a shift in their main thing that they were concentrated in. You know, for many years, Israeli looked for peace. And for the last, I don't know how many years, maybe 20, since the assassination of Rabin, I think that the society of Israel is focused on democracy, or losing democracy, or democracy in stake in Israel. Some of us believe that this is the situation. Some others don't think so. Some others maybe don't think that democracy is so important, and they see some contradiction between democracy and Jewishness of Israel. The attack on the institute in Israel of the Democratic Institute is quite obvious, and I believe that all the people that are sitting here know about that. It's no news. It's an attack against the media. It's an attack against the High Court of Justice and courts in general. It's an attack against NGOs in Israel, and so on. And the question here that was phrased by Eli, that I listened to you very carefully, to what you said. It's a question whether Germany should help those kinds of people in Israel that want to protect democracy. Is it legitimate? Is this help legitimate? And in what kind of way Germany could help? And this is another question. I just wanted to say before entering to this subject one thing more. Germany, after Second World War, was focused, in my view, on two things that are related to what we're talking about. One is how to protect Germany of repeating the whole thing of being from a democracy turned to be a fascist state. And the other thing that Germany was focused is how to help the victims. Israel was focused mainly on the victims, how to protect the people of Israel that it would never repeat again. And that's it. We didn't think as a state that something of turning from democracy to something else might happen to us. And I think that on that particular issue, Germany had some experience that we don't have. When we're talking about the question, what can be done by Germany, I think that, look, the debate in Israel, how to protect Israel's democracy, is our business, the citizens of Israel. No other state could solve the problem for us. That I know. And this is an axiomatic issue for me. I'm not asking help of anyone from out of Israel to help us with this. But what is needed, the help that is needed, and I think that every friend of every other state that is believe in democracy, Israel was founded as a democracy. This is the basic principle of the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel, that Israel is a democracy. And everyone who believes that democracy is good for the people of the country. And this is the best way how to protect their rights. And we have an experience of other states, what happened when there's no democracy. So every state that believes that democracy is the right way to be friends with the other state, and especially Germany, with Israel, I think that any help that could be given to NGOs and to people in Israel to protect our democracy is the right thing to do. And when democracy collapsed in one state, it might happen in the neighbor states. It's not something, it's like a disease. When it happened in one state, it might affect you, even if you don't want to look at this state at all. It might happen to you. So it's the most important thing for those people who believe in democracy, that it's like a disease. When it happened somewhere and you are caring for this place, help this place that it won't happen there. And this is what we need in all kinds of ways of help. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dalia. And our next speaker is Mark.
Thank you very much, Fania. Congratulations, first of all, to Anna and Katharina for having released this great piece. It was great fun. I can say, since I only contributed to the book, it was not that much work. I just had to restructure my thoughts. And being back here in Haifa also brings back great memories of the conference we've had in Bochum. And now I also remember that there was a lot of rain also when we've met in Bochum. There were quite good memories because we celebrated your wedding day there with 2 bottles of champagne. I remember this, Fania and Eli. But there was also a very challenging aspect, and this was, I remember exactly when Eli started grilling me on the legal aspect of our work as political foundations, and I completely agree with you that this remains, I think, as a big challenge, not only internationally, where we always have to wrestle with national laws and regulations, but also internally. It's also a challenge for us as political foundations in Germany to see what are the legal bases, because we are always very proud to refer to the Constitution, to the German basic law, where we defined our mandate, basically, because the political parties in Germany has a very crucial role to play. We, as parties, are mentioned there, and not only as a vehicle to contribute to decision making, but also to educate the Germans. This is part of the Constitution, and this was the main reason why, after World War II, the political foundations were funded. What I've learned in the past 3.5 years here is when you sit on a panel, you do not answer the question that was given to you. So I would like to restructure a bit what I have prepared and go back to the presentations by the 3 opening speeches. And what I found quite interesting is the fact that you kind of structured, which of course you have to do as researchers, the performance of foundations here both in Israel and in the Palestinian territories. I think I'm quite an isolated actor here because I'm the one who has to represent the Palestinian cause here. And I was quite wondering when you were mentioning the 3rd, let's say, open stage where you are currently, or where you identify us currently, where am I here as a head of an office that is still entitled Palestinian territories? I think it already tells you everything. It tells us that the mandate that was given to the office when it was opened in 1996 basically failed. Because until today, there's no country office Palestine, because the peace process has failed, and all other attempts, be it from the region, be it from outside, also failed. And this still gives me this very, special identity of heading a country office that is not really a country, and we always dance around this term. And I can tell you, until today, it's also within Germany a big controversy, of course, how to call this thing that I'm in charge of. But still, we also went through a very diversifying process. As you can imagine, in 1996, as many other institutions as well, we opened the office with basically 2 tasks. We wanted to contribute to the 2-state solution and the 2-state paradigm, and we wanted to contribute to Palestinian at least state building. And on both dimensions, we as the international community have failed. And this brings me back to the initial idea of the authors and the researchers behind this whole project, discussing our role. Because to be honest, it's not always very present discussing your own role, despite the fact, and I think this is something that I really like about my work in Palestine, you always end up on the meta level, given what I've said before, given that we are all here to contribute to the two-state paradigm and two-state building, knowing this whole concept has failed, basically. So I think one of the challenges that I'm seeing here, or where this meta level is more in place, it's when we are talking about the do no harm principle, as this concept is quite famous within development cooperation. At least you do not want to harm the people where you operate. This is something I'm wrestling a lot currently with, because I think that we do a lot of harm to the Palestinians with our presence, given that we are not kind of re-entering the discussion on why are we there, what are we doing there, and why are we doing it. And the second aspect, and this goes, I think, comes closer to the work that we are doing as a political foundation, it's the shrinking space aspect. I know that this is a debate that is quite, or at least it has been quite visible in Israel because of different bills that have been drafted, but we are also seeing it in the Palestinian community, not only in Gaza, but specifically also in the West Bank with different legislative projects that were introduced by President Abbas. But now let me touch more the initial question. So what is the role? And I know that I've had some problems with these terminologies, being a player or being a payer. I very much go with what the ambassador has pointed out. We are independent. We are very independent, but the question is what to do with it. What is the beauty about being an independent foreign policy actor? I think, first of all, in many cases, and we as Adenauer Foundation operate today in around 120 countries around the world. So basically we are everywhere. Yeah? And in most of the cases, we are in line with the official German foreign policy's positions. So there are maybe some nuances where we would have different, like clearly defined different opinions. But still, I think the added value that we can contribute and that we would identify as the core of our work is that we have more room for maneuver. And this comes in four aspects, I would say. First of all, we can speak out. So we are never seriously concerned, and I want to be a bit more black and white, as diplomats tend to be. Yeah? So you would find many declarations where the official German government would express concerns or rejections, etc. I think, given that we are only following our own set of values, I think we can be more pronounced here, and I think this makes us even a very radical actor, especially when it comes to such a political context as in Israel-Palestine, where I would only follow international law, which is sometimes quite difficult from an Israeli perspective, when I, for instance, have to judge on what's happening between Hamas and the IDF. But it's also very difficult what the Palestinian leadership has to digest when I report about the human rights situation within the West Bank or within Gaza. The second aspect, and it was already mentioned, I think, by Katharina, we are not only a think tank, but we are also a do tank. Maybe I'm a bit more concrete here. I remembered that there was a lot of research and a lot of talk about the US-Palestinian, US-Israeli relations under Trump, and we saw different events last year unfolding that kind of substantialized these changes. And it was a Monday when the PLO office was closed in Washington, which was kind of the highest diplomatic representation of the Palestinians in the US. 3 days later, we hosted Ambassador Hussam Zumlot, who until that Monday was actually heading this office, and we could meet with decision makers, diplomats, journalists, representatives of the think tank community to discuss with him the future of the US-Palestinian relationship. So I think where others stop their work in analyzing the situation, we start operating. I mean, this talk was a very basic thing, but we have not maybe the financial means, but at least some material means also to translate analysis into actions. And the third aspect is that there are no limitations. So there's nobody who can intervene in my work. Of course, we report to the government, and every cent is, appropriately spent, I can swear. But when it comes to content, we would not accept political interference from the government. And I come back to this later. And then there's a fourth aspect, which is the partnership principle, which is materialized in the financial dimension. So we of course give money to other national and local actors, but what is more important for us is that we do not come with the analysis already. So maybe we take the strategic decision to open an office, but then it's up to our partner network that we first have to create. So this is the biggest homework of our work, with whom we then define the analysis and the needs that a society might see, and this then of course has to match with what we can offer, which is first of all, of course, a political network and access to the political decision makers community. I think I'm touching now the 5 minutes, so I have to be a bit quick, because there was this assumption maybe we are just a tool of Germany's foreign policy, and I think I would not take or use the term of a tool, but rather of a partner. Because, and it was mentioned before, I think many states and many parties, other countries could be quite jealous of us, of having political foundations. And this is the case, I think, for 4 reasons. Reasons because we, with the presence abroad, also democratize Germany's foreign policy. And I think this is quite unique. Because currently we have the situation that every party runs its own think tank for international relations. This is quite exceptional, I would say. So every party and every party member has the possibility to go through the foundations and receive quite substantial information on developments in other countries and other regions. It helps us performing as a leading nation, and I think, despite all the setbacks and changes that we are seeing within the EU and globally, Germany still is an important actor, and I agree we do have an impact with our work. And to be very quick, the last aspect that I'm seeing is also that we are democratizing foreign policy through the fact that we mirror Germany's democracy abroad, through the fact that in one country you would always find several representatives of political foundations, and we do not hesitate to publicly wrestle for the right analysis. So the two of us might differ in many regards, but I think this is the beauty of democracy, that we have to look for the right answer or the wrong answer, whatever it might be. But we definitely would not appear with one unified answer, as it would be the case if there's only a diplomatic representation to give the one concise answer on where Germany is in one specific question. So I think this is also a very important feature when it comes to public diplomacy, and I think I stop at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mark. This is a good time to say very simply that I wanted very much, and the organizers for sure wanted very much, a Palestinian member of this panel, and for logistical reasons this was not to be. I am hoping that no future panel on relevant issues would be devoid of a Palestinian voice on it. And this is something that we shall keep in mind. It's not always easy, of course. So, yes.
But maybe I can add, it was not for political reasons. We invited, the organizers invited Nada Mashtalani, who used to be a partner, or is still a partner of Konrad Foundation, but it was really just for logistical reasons, so we can send our regards to Nada, but she was really keen to come, yeah.
Yes, well, hopefully Nada will be here at a very close future opportunity, and I'm echoing Professor Eli Salzberger, my colleague, that it is also very important to introduce into the conversation respectfully dissenting voices from the Israeli right. If not, we shall find ourselves talking to each other largely with all due respect to the differences between the Konrad Adenauer and the Heinrich Böll foundations. And now, without further ado, thank you for your patience.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here, especially since I myself was a fellow of the Bucerius Institute more than 10 years ago. So it's a pleasure to be back here in Haifa. And secondly, I just started to work for the foundation in December, so 6 weeks ago, and it's my first position here at the foundation, at the Heinrich Böll Foundation. So reading this book, and I can really recommend reading it, gave me a lot of food for thought and made me reflect on the work of the Heinrich Böll Foundation, and at least what my ideas are, and maybe also my aspirations. And there are colleagues here with a lot of more experience, and if I'm completely wrong, you're welcome to correct me afterwards. So first of all, I want to take up this question, Katharina, you posed of payer and player, and I think it's important to speak about that because the debate still is focused very much on the funding of organizations here. But from my point of view, this is really only a very small part of what the foundations do. And if you want to characterize the work of the foundations, I would say we are maybe go-betweens or brokers between different institutional fields. And that really is part of the complexity also of the work of the foundations. So, for example, here in Israel, we work on very different levels. Of course, we promote civil society, especially as the Heinrich Böll Foundation. We have strategic partners who share our values, and we support projects they do. But we work on different other levels. We work with municipalities, and we even have a fellow working at the Ministry of Environmental Protection. So we are working on different levels here. But as you asked for the ethics code, we do not interfere, and we do not want to interfere in Israeli elections, for example. And as a foundation, we do not support any political parties running in the elections. But then secondly, we also work on the bilateral level. So we promote German-Israeli dialogue, and we serve as a platform also of mutual exchange. And that was a very important contribution of the German foundations historically. You referred to that in building trust after the historical legacy of the Shoah. And this continues to be an important part of the work of the foundations. And we are funded by the BMZ, the Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. But I mean, Israel is an OECD country, and so a focus of our work really is on promoting the dialogue, promoting dialogue also on common challenges, because we have to defend liberal democracy not only in Israel, but especially in Germany itself and in Europe and all over the world. So we really want to identify common challenges and discuss these challenges really on an eye-to-eye level. I think from my own experience, like the German-Israeli dialogue very often is more a German comment on what is going on in Israel than really a dialogue, and we are committed to have a real dialogue. But we also serve as facilitators for our partners to German networks, and here we benefit from this hybrid character. So we do have access to German parties, to German parliaments on the various levels, and we can bring our partners to Germany on advocacy tours and study tours. And thirdly, we provide analysis, and that was already mentioned. We are kind of think tank also, and we bring decision makers also here to this region. You said that the politicians in your interviews said that the political foundations are quite important and that we do have an impact. Well, from these few months working from the foundation, I'm very skeptical about that. And then thirdly, we are not working on the bilateral level, but the foundation is part of a transnational policy network where we really bring together like-minded organizations from all over the world, and where we have the possibility to cross-link debates, discourses, practices. And for example, we bring together all our environment and sustainability coordinators from all over the world, really to discuss current developments and to pool resources. So we're also working on that transnational level. So in that sense, political foundations are players, and I would say this is the added value that we have compared to other donors, and this is the only reason you can justify having the foundations with these big offices here. And there are 7 people working for the Heinrich Böll Foundation in the Tel Aviv office alone, and this can only be justified by this the added value that the foundations can provide. And within these different settings, on these different levels, the foundation has also, or plays different roles. We can be partner, we can be networkers, catalysts, but also sites of resistance, and you really have to go into empirical case studies to really analyze how the foundations work. So this could be the second volume of this series, maybe, on political foundations. And I just want to add just one more thing. You asked us, to what extent are we independent from the German government? And Mark already said a few things about that. But of course, the German government is funding the political foundations, and Katharina, you referred to this as the soft side of German foreign policy, and the ambassador spoke of the political foundations as an asset, and that of course reminded me of this concept of soft power, Joseph Nye's concept of soft power, and definitely the foundations are part of German soft power, like also the Goethe Institute, other cultural institutions, and Germany tries to project soft power. And yeah, that's for sure. But Joseph Nye was very clear about also the limits of soft power, because it tends to have only diffuse effects, and it's not easily wielded to achieve specific political outcomes. So the foundations in that sense, and I agree with Mark, are not tools of German foreign policy. On the contrary, German foreign policy benefits from this largely independent and autonomous work of political foundations. Yeah, and I will stop here.
Thank you so much. I like the fact that the diplomacy is soft, but the rain is hard. It's good for this country. So our last speaker, Dr. Robbie Nathanson.
Yes, thank you for inviting me to this event, Mrs. Ambassador, dear organizers. I am here in the capacity of being the Director General of the Macro Center for Political Economics, but on top of it, the Macro Center has very strong, long-lasting cooperation with the Friedrich Ebert Foundation. And from that point of view, I want to also present from the point of view of a partner to an important foundation in Israel that since ever, for more now than 40 years, is operating in our country. How does this cooperation work, and what are the roots, historical roots of this cooperation, and what impact did it have on the Israeli agenda? And one or a couple of occasions that I want to highlight. It is very, very right, so it was mentioned by the introduction words, state politics and civil society, this triangle in which context we operate, that lately and during the last years, the role of the civil society is even more important due to the weakness of state institutions on the one hand, and also politics on the other, that the civil society, also in the context of what Talia Sasson has mentioned, to protect democratic values and basic values of free, open society, has an even more important role, and we do that also with not at least very strong help of the foundations, and in this context also, of course, the Friedrich Ebert Foundation. As I mentioned, more than 40 years the Friedrich Ebert Foundation is operating here. They had a very important event a couple of months ago and also published the work of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation in a very, very impressive publication, also in Hebrew and German, and I believe also in English, available. So to talk about the Friedrich Ebert Foundation and the contribution in the context of the functioning of the German foundations in Israel, we must say also something about the labor movement. It is not a coincidence that the Friedrich Ebert Foundation started officially, although in the 60s there was this delegation mentioned by Anna in her introduction, and also the fact that you also structure the functioning of the foundations in phases that I want also to address. It is not a coincidence that the Friedrich Ebert Foundation started its work in '78, which was after the loss of the Labour Party in the '77 elections, with the deliberate also aim to fortify the labor movement in Israel in a time of crisis and try to reconstruct the political alternative of labor contrary to the government at that time of the Likud party in 77. So this was a clear-cut intention, although not supporting directly the party, but though supporting the idea in the context of the work of the Friedrich Ebert in Israel, in the context also of strong cooperation with the trade unions and the Histadrut at the same time. So this was the first phase, but then this phase had another implication, a wider implication, which had also bigger impact on the political agenda in Israel later. And this was connecting the Labour Party and also the leadership of the Labour Party to what was by then the Socialist International, in which many of the very prominent social democratic leaders of Europe were active, like Kreisky, like Willy Brandt, like Olaf Palme, and so forth. What did this connection generate at the end of the day? It generated the direct dialogue. It was a hidden agenda, but it was the fact of the matter through these activities of what was later then the Oslo process. Why is Oslo in Oslo? And what did it take place there? Because in Oslo, in Norway, during those days, there was a social democratic government that promoted the dialogue in the context of the Socialist International, by then also producing what was then afterwards the Oslo process with all what it meant for Israel. And this was a direct, I would say also, impact of the activities of Friedrich Ebert Foundation, connecting the labor movement and later also the leadership of labor, if it is Shimon Peres and then later also Yitzhak Rabin, to that network. And networking was part of the very important activity of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation as well as other foundations, but it had also an international dimension, as I mentioned, with an enormous impact on the Israeli policy making then later on. And this was not only about the Oslo process, this was also in the context, and this wasn't mentioned too much until now, in connection with the EU project as well. I mean, the formation of the European Union and the institutions of the European Union had also an impact on the work of the foundations in Israel, and Friedrich Ebert brought Israel closer to Europe in many occasions and through their activities and this also same networks. I remember many years ago when also Paul Pasch, the present representative of Friedrich Ebert here in the audience, by then also as assistant of Friedrich Ebert by the beginning of the 90s, where we did a conference with the title The Price of Being Non-Europe, meaning and trying to promote in the Israeli agenda or public opinion, what does it mean to be part or non-part of Europe at that particular time where Europe was constituting itself into a more homogeneous economic and social network, including the introduction of the euro as a currency and so forth. So this was then the later phase of what Friedrich Ebert was promoting in Israel through a variety of projects, bringing Israel also closer to Europe, and also on another field, promoting also regional cooperation following also the Oslo agreements, meaning activities with very much hope for peaceful solutions, so to say, following the Oslo process, which was a very short period of time, but still the projects connected to regional cooperation with Jordan, with representative of the Palestinian authorities, with Egypt, was also a very important component of the activities during that time. Then later, I don't want to elaborate too much on the Oslo process because we might know what was the end of it, but still there were many activities to connect also decision makers in Israel to wider projects which had also an impact on social democratic movements, not only here but also in many other European countries, like the Third Way, which was an idea of social democracy that generated success, political success in many European countries, and at the end of the day also in Israel, which was also embraced by then the Prime Minister Ehud Barak, and at that particular occasion we did have the opportunity to bring over, for example, a very important thinker in the context of the Third Way, like Professor Anthony Giddens, to Israel, that introduced the idea of this new social democratic approach into the Israeli arena or Israeli policies. So this was then a later phase in the operation of Friedrich Ebert in Israel, but by then the political process in Israel generated a situation where this access to decision makers was much limited, and of course also the legislation in Israel also limited possibilities to cooperate directly in some fields directly with political parties, so meaning that the structure of the work of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, but also of many of the other foundations in Israel, had to adjust to this new mechanism of how to operate or generate agendas in Israel, not necessarily directly connected to political parties. Therefore, lately, I would say, and this was also mentioned in the introduction, the agendas had changed from politicization more to concretely issues that are concretely addressed, if it is on the field of gender policies or field of environment or field of issues related to the labor market and things like that, meaning that, in other words, the work of the foundations and also of the Friedrich Ebert has more going for a multiple approach with multiple partners rather than focusing on trying to have an impact on a single party or a single movement or a single party. So at this particular time, we are of course challenged by the issues that are now also limiting the flexibility of what can the foundations do in the context of the civil society, trying also to protect the basic values and the basic aims of democracy, civil rights, social rights that are very much challenged through the present administration and politics in Israel. This is our real challenge that if I hear the other partners in this panel are very much similar, if it is Friedrich Ebert, Heinrich Böll, or even Konrad Adenauer. We are on, in that context on the same boat.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Robin Natterson. We do have about 5 minutes for questions, but let me paraphrase the great philosopher Thomas Hobbes. I would like your questions to be tough, gracious, and short. Floor is open. Yes, please. If you can perhaps stand, introduce yourself, and speak loudly.
Good evening. Thank you, first of all, very much for sharing your positions. One question to Mr. Frays. The aspect of shrinking aspects was now mentioned several times, and you divide them up into different dimensions. Sorry. Yeah. One better. Could you maybe contextualize the aspect of shrinking aspects? In your 3.5 years in the Palestinian territories, on the one hand, regarding the role of Palestinian players and politicians and organizations, and on the other hand, by feedback from public perception. And the second question, very different, sorry, Mr. Adenauer, assuming that the aspect of shrinking aspects will lead to a satisfying status quo, how would the process look like to widen the spaces again?
Thank you for your questions. I think we will pick up 2 or 3 more and then have a final round of response. Any other raised hands? Yes, Ayelet, please.
Thank you for the presentations and for the to the authors and all the other thanks that were already given. I would like to add to them. But the question is indeed about the differences between the foundations. You mentioned it, but maybe if you can say something more about to what extent are there differences? Because one would expect that representing or being affiliated to different political parties, you would have distinctive agendas that somehow reflect the opposition and rivalry between the parties. But it seems not so much to be the case abroad. So it seems that that there is, so the difference between, do you see yourself as representing different agendas that reflect the political parties that the foundations are associated with? And also the difference between the politics of the different parties, the Greens and the CDU and the SPD, in Germany and what you do here. So I think that's...
Thank you very much. If there are no further questions, I will put the last to all panelists. What would you consider your greatest success of your foundation here or your NGO so far? And this is for each of you. So if you like, we can either begin with you, Mark, and
Yeah, thank you for the questions. So the first about shrinking spaces also. I mean, Mark will speak about that, but I want to address this question also from maybe a German perspective, because I think we also have shrinking spaces in Germany, especially in the discussion on Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I can add maybe a bit about my experiences with the Green Party. And it was, I mean, I have been to the headquarters for 2 months before coming here, and I spoke with a lot of politicians from the Green Party, and we have really a polarization within the party. On the one hand, we have those who stand in solidarity with Israel, even with the Israeli government, without being critical to the Israeli government. We have a lot of on the federal level, anti-BDS legislation coming up. And then you have still, I mean, if you read the chapter on the history of the Greens, they were always torn between these different poles of having sympathy and solidarity with the Palestinians who were perceived as the victim, and being solidarity with Israel from a historical perspective. And I think the Greens found some common ground in supporting a two-state solution, the self-determination of the Israelis and the Palestinians, of supporting Israel as a democratic state of the Jewish people. But at the moment, we have such a polarization that really a nuanced debate is sometimes nearly impossible. And there are Green politicians who don't want to speak about Israel or the conflict, because they say we can only lose. We don't have anything to win. And so actually this is a shrinking space in Germany we have. And what we do is we try to provide really a nuanced, multifaceted analysis that allows really to discuss the substantive issues. And this, I think, is an important contribution, but I hope we will be more successful in the coming years, and that would be a great success from my point of view.
Thank you very much. Starting with the shrinking spaces aspect, I think there were 3 chapters how shrinking spaces were unfolded in the Palestinian context. Of course, there were more like formalized attacks on, let's call it, democratic performance in the Palestinian territories, which was, of course, the end of the PLC, the end of the Legislative Council due to the split between Fatah and Hamas. So there was no legislative watchdog control anymore on the executive branch. Then for the past 3 years, we saw a concrete attack on the, I don't know how independent it was, but at least there was a judicial arm that was completely attacked and now is politicized. So there's no independent court whatsoever in the Palestinian context. And what we are seeing since approximately 2 years, I would say, is attacking those who remain critical, namely NGOs, CSOs, media. And this goes down to every individual Palestinian. You see arrests, you see interrogations based on critical Facebook or Twitter remarks. And this has created an atmosphere of fear. We saw kind of a revitalized debate also on human rights violations through the report provided by Human Rights Watch. This was published last year, and it was the first time since approximately 2011, I would say, that the debate was back in the center of the Palestinians, because it was only a topic after, let's say, several years of experiences with the split between Gaza and the West Bank. And you also ask for the perception, and this brings me to another aspect of our example of our work. 4 times a year, we conduct public opinion polls with the leading pollster in Palestine, which is Khalil Shikaki, and these empirical findings mirror exactly what I've just described, that people are afraid of disagreeing with the leadership publicly. So they do not have the feeling that it is okay to disagree with the decisions provided by PLO/PA. And I also see it on a very personal level. For me, it's now the third time that I'm living in the Palestinian territories. I was there during the second Intifada and later during a research project. And I even see it on my private environment that people are disembarking from the public arena. So what was super politicized in the past, the market, a ride with the taxi, everything basically, is now completely depoliticized. So people gave up, not only with regard to any hopes for peace between Israel and Palestine, but also with regard to any kind of reforms provided by their current leadership. And you find all these findings for free. This is also part of the beauty of our work on our website. So yeah. Then there was this question for the biggest success of our work. Of course, I mean, I think the formally biggest success was definitely that I brought President Abbas to Germany, which is, I think, also a controversy, as you can imagine. So on the one hand, he's the one partner for us for peace. He gives us everything that we as Europeans are asking for: two-state paradigm, non-violence, negotiations as the only tool to end the conflict, etc. But at the same time, he's the author of what I've just described in my first response on shrinking spaces. But still, we have provided him, as Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, a platform to give a speech, but he was also then kind of pushed friendly by me to remain on stage for a Q&A session. And I then afterwards could also organize meetings with the Chancellor, with the Foreign Minister. Of course, this was for me personally a very great experience. I thought until the last moment, in case he canceled, I've made a very great experience because I could meet in the Mukata with the protocol to write the talking points. I did the same in Germany. So this was a very, very nice experience I could make. But I think this is just the formally biggest success. But what I found even more interesting and more important for my work in Palestine is that for the past 3.5 years, I synchronized our analysis with the actions that we are doing in the field. One of my core messages is always 70% of Palestinians are 30 years or younger, which means that 70% of the Palestinian society does not have a single personal memory of Oslo and the hopes that were connected to Oslo. So what we're doing now as CAS is focusing on these 70% through different initiatives in Gaza. We are very active in Gaza among social entrepreneurs / startups. We're active in East Jerusalem with a different partnership program and one in the West Bank, which also says a lot about the fragmented realities in Palestine. So you have to design your projects really according to the political realities there. But I really like the fact, and again, this is a very personal thing also, that I can somehow attack this puzzle of Palestinian youth and their strategies for a better future. Yes, and I'll leave it with this. Thank you.
Okay. I want to relate to the question of the greatest success. What is a success? I think the success nowadays has a lot to do with anything what has to do with the young generation. The Friedrich Ebert Foundation runs a survey every 6 years about the opinions of young people in Israel in all sectors of the society. It's among 1,300 youngsters participating in this survey and analyzing the trends of the Israeli society and looking what will the future look like through understanding what we receive in the results of the survey. And I can share with you, for example, one of the very interesting results that challenges us in our work, also with the Friedrich Ebert, but also in general, regarding the last survey that we ran in 2016-17. And that survey we discover, compared to the other surveys that we started since '98, that Arab youngsters in Israel, and I'm talking in Israel, not in the occupied territories. We have also comparisons to the occupied territories that we will publish in the future, are more optimistic about the future in Israel than the Jewish youngsters in the same age. And they are more optimistic about the future of the country than the Jewish youngsters in the same age, in the category between 15 and 25 years. So this means something for us, for the work also in the civil society with this young generation. This is an enormous challenge to understand what is going on among the young people. So this is from the point of view of service that are run also in cooperation with Friedrich Ebert in that field. But Friedrich Ebert is also doing a lot in projects training young leaders, not from a particular party, but from a variety of parties, from the Orthodox to the also more liberal or other parties, training them to understand better the democracy, civil rights, and the basic values of our society that we want to protect and also to enforce in our work.
Thank you so much. Talia would be the last.
Excuse me, please. I would like to add only 2 sentences, Fania, if I may. My name is Paul Pasch. I am the head of FAS office in Israel, and I would like to agree with Bobby that there are many success stories of our work in this country. But I would certainly like to mention 2. The first is that we have been operating in this country for 60 years. We have established an office 40 years ago, and we are still a welcome and appreciated partner in this country, and thank you very much for this. And considering all the success stories that there were in the 60 years of cooperation, I would like to say that with regard to sustainability, I think that the opportunity given to us to serve as a bridge between Israel, Germany, and Europe, that has been the greatest success story. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So I try to do this short, although to speak about the NGOs in Israel and their success is a huge thing. There are a lot of successes in shared society, in women, gender, and human rights, in LGBT, and many aspects of when we are talking about human rights and democracy. But the main thing that I want to emphasize, and in my opinion, this is the most important thing, I think that the NGOs in Israel continue to give a message to the Israelis that we are not going to raise our hands. We will fight for Israel democracy and do the best we can until the end.
So, thank you, Talia. Distinguished audience, dear esteemed panelists, before Katarina Konarek closes formally this fascinating meeting, what can I tell you? This now is the winter of our discontent, but spring shall come and flowers turn to fruit. First half is Shakespeare, second half is myself. Thank you so much, and congratulations to both co-editors and participants in this important volume that we have been celebrating today.
Thank you, dear guests, for coming. 3 short announcements are standing between us and the food. I want to say, first of all, we have a second book launch now. For all of you who came to Jerusalem, can have the pleasure to see us in 2 days again on Wednesday at the Willy Brandt Center at 7 o'clock, together with Judith Stellmach from the FAS Israel, together with Mark Frings, and with our Palestinian colleagues. They will. This was the first announcement. The second announcement is I want to thank you, my team who helped me to put up all these things today. It's Amir Baon, Lucas, Lars, Danny, who is standing next to me. Without you, we couldn't have done it. And maybe a third thing, it's the first time for us catering this building, so we probably know that we shouldn't cater it in winter because it was very cold. I'm very happy to invite you now for a glass of wine. So
I would like to have 1 more minute of your time before we start with the drinks and the snacks that we all need to stay warm. Katarina, we want to thank you on behalf of all of the students for your effort of working at the center and everything you do. You're a real role model to us. Especially now, we all want to thank you for organizing this event, which was wonderful and very interesting. And of course, we want to thank you and your co-author for writing the book and being such an inspiration for other PhD students to do something similar maybe in a few years. So thank you very much.
That was really not planned. No. That was really not planned. Okay, so I invite you all for a very nice glass of wine that is catered by the local wine bar. Enjoy yourselves.